While the character of the noble savage was a product of the Eastern literati and made appearances in plays, paintings, and poetry, many romantics believed that the real noble savages existed in the frontier West, beyond the influence of European civilization. This notion inspired artists like George Catlin to venture westward along with surveyors and explorers. Numerous media outlets and Western boosters and publicizers were encouraging and sponsoring artist excursions to the West, including for the purposes of documenting the vanishing Indians. The Crayon Art magazine in 1856 put out a call for artists to go out and document the images of Native Americans before they passed away. Artists and writers who participated in these excursions, knowingly or not, helped to establish justification for confiscating these lands from indigenous inhabitants, while simultaneously celebrating the cultures of these peoples. Successful Eastern portrait painter George Catlin left his studio in 1830 for St. Louis, Missouri, which at that time was the edge of the frontier. He spent 6 years on 5 trips west of the Mississippi, documenting observations of Native American practices and clothing, what he referred to as their costumes. Catlin was assisted by General William Clark, and yes, that is General William Clark from the earlier Lewis and Clark expedition. They visited 50 western indigenous settlements, and Catlin produced over 500 scenes. The Romantic aesthetic, including the principles of primitivism, can be clearly identified in Catlin's writings and his images. In an essay from 1832, Catlin stated, quote, "I have for many years past contemplated the noble races of red men who are now spread over these trackless forests and boundless prairies, melting away at the approach of civilization. Their rights invaded, their morals corrupted, their lands wrested from them, their customs changed, and therefore lost to the world. And they at last sunk into the earth, and the plowshare turning the sod over their graves. And I have flown in to their rescue, not of their lives or of their race, for they are doomed and must perish, but to the rescue of their looks and their modes, at which the acquisitive world may hurl their poison and every besom of destruction, and trample them down and crush them to death. Yet, phoenix-like, they may rise from the stain on a painter's palette, and live again upon canvas, and stand forth for centuries yet to come, the living monuments of a noble race. For this purpose, I have designed to visit every tribe of Indians on the continent, if my life should be spared, for the purpose of procuring portraits of distinguished Indians of both sexes in each tribe, painted in their native costume, accompanied with pictures of their villages, domestic habits, games, mysteries, religious ceremonies, with anecdotes, traditions, and history of their respective nations." End quote. Catlin's comments evidence what anthropologist Renato Rosaldo refers to as imperialist nostalgia, a yearning for that which one has directly or indirectly participated in destroying. Imperialist nostalgia can be identified in all kinds of artworks. Can you think of any that we've looked at this semester that could be considered imperialist nostalgia? How about the play Metamora? Is that an example of imperialist nostalgia? I'd like for you to keep this concept in mind, especially as you watch Dances with Wolves. Now, once Catlin returned east, he organized his works into what he termed an Indian gallery, that toured the U.S. between 1837 and 1840 and then moved on to London and Paris. The popularity of Catlin's gallery in Europe was in great part due to Catlin's images confirming the primitivistic noble savage image perpetuated by European artists. Catlin's works and gallery influenced a broader cultural interest in Native American arts and crafts in the United States. Between 1860 and 1930, the U.S. government sponsored the collection of Native American arts, and wealthy citizens amassed private collections of indigenous arts, crafts, and artifacts. Much later, Catlin would be critiqued for altering the authenticity of these representations. Catlin openly admitted to omitting, quote, such trappings and ornaments as it interfered with the grace and simplicity of the figure, end quote. Here he's speaking of a tomahawk and a scalping knife. He employed the composite technique made popular among American romantics by Thomas Cole. Catlin also portrays the Mandan in front of teepees, which were not their architectural structures. Rather, teepees were the dwelling structures of nomadic plains tribes and came to represent a generalized Euro-American view of Native American life and identity. Catlin intended to capture and communicate the essence of what he referred to as the uncontaminated peoples of America, but he ignored context and history. These indigenous populations had had several hundred years of contact with Europeans, Spanish, French, and English traders and soldiers. Catlin's disregard for this history perpetuated the myth of the American Indian rather than documenting the lifeways of actual peoples. To pretend these indigenous populations were uncontaminated only served the aesthetic conventions of Romanticism. Catlin was a part of the broader Romantic-inspired movement in the popular and high arts, grappling with the tensions between savagery and civilization, nature and culture, which were seemingly being played out as high drama in the American West. In our next lecture, we will examine the genre of the Western as it developed in response to the increasing interest of Eastern urbanites. We'll examine how Buffalo Bill's Wild West show employs the aesthetics of Romanticism and the aesthetics of the Western, as well as the tradition of the noble savage, to construct a particular version of American history.